It's not new to incorporate social media into stories. In fact, at this point, the absence of any acknowledgement of social media in a modern story feels inherently a bit naive. Whether it's a political thriller or a high school drama, social media fundamentally shapes our daily lives, both directly and indirectly, so of course it's going to be reflected in our media. But the challenge with that is making it sound and feel authentic. And that is genuinely very difficult, especially when you're writing a narrative about something as niche as Buried Stars. You're mixing stan culture, K-pop, reality competition shows, and interpersonal conflicts together in a way that could easily come across as lazy or inauthentic. Buried Stars, for the unfamiliar, is a visual novel about a group of contestants in a South Korean competition show of the same name, who get trapped after their studio collapses on them, and follows their journey as they try to survive until they can be rescued. Fader, the game's stand-in for Twitter, serves as the only consistent connection that the 5 contestants and their assistant producer have to the outside world, both in terms of being able to post their own messages as well as allowing them to see what other people are saying about them, the show, and the collapse. It would be really easy in this context to go purely cynical and just make every social media user an evil dumbass, or to go the other route and just make the personalities that scroll across the screen feel like generic empty profiles that just exposition dump on you. Buried Stars manages to thread the needle though. One thing I kept coming back to throughout my playthrough was that I was struck by how real Fader felt. How the fans, the haters, and just the general online space reflected a real understanding of social media toxicity, in particular when it comes to stan culture. You come to recognize certain usernames as being almost friends who are consistently the voice of reason, defending the protagonist Do-yoon from bad faith attacks and asking for grace. But you also come to recognize the personalities of the other accounts too. The ones who will jump on whatever argument is needed to trash you or your competitors, and if it's proven false, they'll just jump to the next thing without ever skipping a beat. You have haters in Buried Stars. People who feel so strongly about you that they get vicious, cruel, and sadistic, and they are very happy to do so. If you try to defend yourself, they'll latch onto it and find a way to twist it into proof that you're evil and uncaring because you didn't talk about another character or a death in the way that they would have wanted. If you stay silent, well, they take that as proof of your guilt and gleefully drag you for all you're worth. But maybe what they get most right out of all of that is the impact of that toxicity. The psychological effect it has on not just Do-yoon, but all the other contestants as they navigate both their current crisis, but also, hopefully, what will come after the escape for all of them. They're fighting their own PR battles even while buried under rubble, trying to beg for votes as the game's namesake show announces that the competition is still on and the contestant with the fewest votes will still be eliminated. And that's before someone imitating their producer who died in the collapse starts threatening to kill the person in last. They're trying to protect their own secrets, to defend their past decisions, to emerge from the shadows of their families and criminal records and failed career ambitions of the past. All while the game's antagonist, if it could be said to have one, uses Fader to spill the tea on all of them. A warning up front, this video will discuss some heavy subjects including self-harm and suicide, so if those are sensitive topics for you, I would recommend proceeding with caution. As well, if you haven't played Buried Stars yet, I really cannot recommend it enough. It is an amazing game, and if this sort of thing is your niche in particular, I'm confident you'll like it. This video will spoil a fair bit of the story for you, and I would recommend playing it before watching, but I will make sure to keep it limited to stuff that happens in the first run as much as possible and keep the spoilers vague enough that they don't give away too much. If you don't want to play it for yourself, you can also find my full playthrough of it in the description. It is on sale pretty often though, so you can usually pick it up for a good deal. Also, if you wanted a Wiggler pin but didn't get in on the pre-order, there's a giveaway going on right now. There were a bunch of community-based donathon rewards from last month, including letting you guys pick an upcoming video topic, resurrect an old member's choice topic, and pick some channel emotes. So I've combined all of them into one big Google form where you can vote for any or all of those. Everyone who participates is entered into the giveaway to win one of these 4 pin bundles, so if you'd like a little guy of your own, or just want to have a say in some future content, be sure to check out the link in the description. With that said, let's get into it. Part 1. What is Buried Stars? In order to explain what's going on, it would probably help to explain the actual premise of the game and its in-universe show first. As mentioned, the game follows the story of the 5 finalists of the 4th season of the reality music competition show Buried Stars, and their floor director after the stage collapses on them and they're trapped in the rubble. The show's producer, Sung Shin, has died in the collapse, and the 6 survivors are just waiting to be rescued. The actual structure of the show itself isn't super well explained, but it doesn't really need to be. We know that there are auditions, we know that there's a preliminary stage, there's a group stage, there's challenges both in teams and individually, but we don't really need to know the nuances of it. It's also not clear how many people were part of the show at the beginning or how long this season's been going for, but it can be assumed that there were initially quite a few people, and the show's been going on for at least a couple months or so based on some of the developments that have happened over the course of it. The details that are important for our purposes here, and I am deliberately trying to keep it narrow because I have a hard time not gushing about this game and I can't afford to make another 90-minute video right now, revolve around a few key people and a few key concepts. When it comes to people, the big one is Sung-yeon. She is a notorious producer who's built a reputation as someone who plays dirty but gets results, exploiting contestants and their backstories to maximize entertainment. She will break laws, exploit loopholes, and resort to blackmail if that's what it takes to get a good show. There's no secret she thinks she shouldn't share if it'll boost the ratings, and to her credit, she does get results. Buried Stars was apparently floundering before she was brought on as the producer, and now it's a barn burner. In fact, it's later revealed that part of why the stage collapsed is that it was a rush job to try and build a bigger studio to accommodate the larger live audience. Corners were cut, and she was killed as a consequence. The reason she matters to us here is twofold. First, she's unequivocally the one steering the narratives for all the contestants, and even for the floor director, even well beyond the grave. She's been crafting narratives for them throughout the season, building up storylines that suit her needs, and egging the audience on to ensure they stay engaged. When Hye-sung was just the pretty boy twink that all the girls obsessed over, she gave him a graceful edit that covered both his mistakes and performances and his aggressive personality. When it came out that he had a criminal record for an assault in high school, she swapped it immediately to paint him as the ex-con who had been hiding his violent tendencies under a pretty smile. The reason this aspect of her matters is because she deliberately weaponized Fader as part of building this narrative, using it to launder the dirt she'd accumulated as well as to help build hype by giving them something to talk about. In other words, she deliberately incited social media toxicity because she knew that weaponizing stan culture for ratings at the expense of her contestants would get results, and again, can't really argue that she was wrong there. The other major reason that she matters is that, after the collapse, somebody starts impersonating her on Fader using the username S_Seungyeon and starts actively inciting even bigger Fader hate trains. See, the basic mechanics of Buried Stars as a show revolve around a live audience vote, with the person with the fewest votes being eliminated each episode. Standard music competition show structure. Before the stage collapse, Gi-hyuk was in first place, Jo-young was in second, Inha was in third, Do-yoon was in fourth, and Hye-sung was in fifth, and voting was still ongoing. After the collapse, the contestants and audience initially assumed that voting is paused because, duh, a building fell on the contestants, but the show's official account quickly announces that voting will remain open, and it causes a bit of a panic. Hye-sung immediately hops on Fader to try and campaign for votes and build his reputation because he really needs them. He's kind of struggling. He's at about 787,000 votes, whereas Do-yoon's at 800,000 and Inha's at 817,000, so it is definitely within striking distance for him if he can really ramp it up right now. Especially since Do-yoon is especially bad at campaigning, and his former band's lead singer is actively trashing him as we speak. Speaking of, each of the contestants has been labeled by the show and fanbase based on the narrative that Seungyeon has constructed for them. Gi-hyuk is the silver spoon, owing to having a father who is a famous singer. Ji-young is the runaway, or the absconder, because she had previously been set to debut with a group called Beloved before she suddenly abandoned them out of nowhere, causing the group to collapse. Inha is the snob, because she picks fights with people and thinks she's better than everyone. Do-yoon is the betrayer, because he was given the opportunity to continue in the competition if he was willing to go as a solo artist and abandon his band Masquerade. And Hye-sung is the ex-con, because when he was in high school he caught a charge for assaulting one of his classmates. These narratives are all, to some degree, false, and mostly manufactured by Seungyeon. They're not really true. Spoilers ahead, but Gi-hyuk's superstar father abandoned him as a child and left him to suffer in poverty. Ji-young quit Beloved because a producer sexually harassed her and said it was part of the deal of being in the group, which she now has PTSD and an anxiety disorder over. Inha was basically just a blank slate who was willing to play whatever part they'd give her if that's what it took. Do-yoon was... well, okay, he kind of was a betrayer, but it is complicated. And Hye-sung didn't actually start the fight that he caught the charge for. Some rich kid with well-connected parents did, and so even though Hye-sung was the victim, he got charged. There's also Sale, who initially is just a random production guy, but later gets implicated as Inha's stalker. And then it gets revealed that he was actually a lol cow from season 2 after he got cut during the preliminary phase and just completely crashed out. And that's a whole thing that we don't really have time for now, but put a pin in it. Anyways, back to why Seungyeon matters. The person impersonating her is threatening to start killing the contestant with the fewest votes, and is leaking a lot of pretty personal details about the contestants to try and prove that they are who they say they are. They expose how Gi-hyuk got a scholarship meant for poor kids even though he's the silver spoon. They expose how Ji-young went to work in a coffee shop even though it's at odds with their story that her anxiety attacks led her to quit Beloved, because I guess apparently in Buried Stars universe, apparently anxious people are allergic to caffeine or something? I don't know. Stuff like that. Seungyeon had a reputation for being a god-tier producer who always knew everything and was always manipulating things behind the scenes, so impersonating her does give an air of legitimacy to what's being said, because if Seungyeon's saying it, it just has a good chance of being true. The threat to kill the contestant in last place just adds more fuel to the fire with Hye-sung, who's obviously nervous about both losing this competition, which to him feels like his last possible lifeline out of his current situation, and also literally his life now. So that's the state of play that the characters are operating in. Their producer is dead, and someone who is impersonating her is threatening to kill Hye-sung while spilling secrets about everyone to just stir up some drama on Fader. The reason Fader itself is so important is that the only connection to the outside world that contestants have is via the smartwatches they were given by production as part of a brand integration, which kind of have pretty limited functionality. They allow each of them to call a handful of pre-established contacts, mostly just each other, as well as emergency services, and they allow them to access Fader through their Buried Stars account so they can engage with fans and promote themselves. In other words, in terms of consistent contact with the outside world, Fader's really their only avenue. However, this video is about how Buried Stars gets social media toxicity correct, gets it right, so while it was necessary to explain that context, it's probably time to move on to what we're really talking about. Part 2. Stan culture for better or worse. Like I mentioned in the intro, Buried Stars finds itself in an intersection of reality TV competition shows and K-pop, two online subcommunities whose fandoms are, for better or for worse, pretty heavily defined by Stan culture in the modern day, and it's usually for worse. Brief history lesson here, but the term comes from the Eminem song of the same name about an obsessive fan named Stan who keeps writing letters to Eminem, and as they go unanswered, he gets more and more upset. The story ends with Stan, who has driven himself insane with his obsession, taking a bunch of pills, getting drunk, tying up his pregnant girlfriend, and throwing her in the trunk of his car, then killing both of them by driving off a bridge. Ever since then, Stan has become both a noun and a verb to describe being a fanatic, obsessive fan of someone or something. It's important to draw the difference between an individual stan, a community of stans, and stan culture at large, though. An individual stan is just that, an individual. They might be a stan in isolation, or they might join a community of like-minded people, but even when you are in a community of stans, it is still fairly individualized. It's not structural, it's not cultural. It's also important to separate fandom from stanning, because while the two go hand in hand a lot of the time, you can be a fan participating in fandom, but not be a stan. And you can stan, or even be part of a small community of stans, without needing to be involved in the broader fandom. All of this is happening under the umbrella of stan culture, though, which is more about how culture is being shaped by this mentality of ride-or-die obsessive fan being at the forefront, rather than how it kind of used to be, which is basically just the mad woman in the attic. For the youths among us, it may be hard to remember a time when standing wasn't like the default model of discussion for stuff like pop music, but I can promise you that it wasn't always this way. Sure, pop stars have always had fandoms, and many of them had featured fans who were obsessive or competitive or aggressive in the ways that we associate with stans. I mean, the song Stan was very much so based on Eminem's response to the kinds of fans who were acting that way towards him, but that wasn't the norm. Part of this is because fan culture in general is often defined by teenage girls, a group of people that everyone really cannot help but be derisive towards. But on a bigger level, I think you could argue that it ties into a broader cultural fixation at the time of creating an image of not wanting to care too much about anything. It was like gauche to be a stan. It was tacky, it was girly, it was nerdy, it was childish, it was immature, stupid, vapid, and it was kind of simple-minded of you. Like, to waste so much time and money and energy obsessing over a pop star? Well, don't you have something better to do with your time? And again, there were fan communities online long before stan culture became the mainstream of all of this stuff, but it was still very different. At one point in time, if you were a fan of something, you weren't beefing with a 14-year-old twice stan on Twitter who threatened to box cutter your dog's Achilles if you talked shit about Gyu. You'd typically be on one of two kinds of online forums. Either a specific one for the specific thing that you're a fan of, or a general purpose one for a broader subject like pop music or something. There would definitely be stan behavior in the specific forums, but in the general ones, stan behavior would be more like kind of a nuisance. You could be a fan of an artist, but you know, there was a limit. There was an expectation that you would be a bit more, I don't know, adult about it. Even if you were a kid, people didn't want kids to be there, so you'd have to hide it and play adult as best as possible if you wanted to be taken seriously. And even then, it was still kind of treated as lame to be that obsessive of a fan of something. Again, you could be a fan of someone or something, but even just the act of seeking out a forum of like-minded fans to gush about how much of a fan you are was like kind of comical to people. It was the refuge of the pathetic, of the antisocial. Stan behavior meant you were either a dangerous lunatic who's going to assault a pop star at an airport or a fucking comic book guy. It was, again, certainly an undercurrent of pop culture discussions and communities, but more the mad woman in the attic than front and center. Stan culture refers to the situation we find ourselves in today, one where standing leads the way in fandom and comes with rules, loyalty, and an obsession with not just the music, but basically playing manager with the artists themselves. Stan culture is using sales numbers to defend your fave. It's talking about artists in terms of their eras and their branding. You know, what color is this Olivia Rodrigo era? It's pre-ordering as many copies of an album as you can afford, then buying every deluxe edition they offer as well. It's getting mad when another artist is to threaten their spot on the charts, and so buying more of their songs to make sure that doesn't happen. What's more, stan culture is about flexing your loyalty, of demonstrating that you're Taylor Swift's strongest soldier not just to yourself and Not even just to other members of that fandom, but to the world at large. It's, in effect, trying to prove that your fave is a serious artist because you'd have to be a serious artist to have such diehard fans. Stan culture turns fandoms into warring factions who feel the compulsion to try and sink other artists who might threaten their diva spot on the charts. It not only incidentally kills critique as an art form, but deliberately does so. An outlet that publishes a negative review has committed an offense against the nation, sullied the honor of Mother, and must face consequences. Pitchfork, watch your backs. It is worth mentioning that this is also, at least in part, a response to the insane way that media treated pop stars in particular in the past, and still do to this day. History has not vindicated Jay Leno for being a massive piece of shit about people like Britney Spears, but you know who it has vindicated? Chris Crocker, the leave Britney alone person. You look back at how the divas of the past were being treated, especially in like the 90s and early aughts as the internet became a more mainstream part of everyone's day and the 24/7 news cycle necessitated some drama to talk about at all times. And it's not hard to see how stan culture emerged as a dominant model of fandom. Nobody wants to see their fave have a mental breakdown, and they want to make sure they know they're not alone. They don't want the artists to have to try and respond to the hate comments or defend themselves from the negative reviews or go after another artist who trashed them. They'll do it on their behalf. And to some extent, that makes sense. It is overwhelming for some of these people to have to deal with that kind of review response, even if that is a normal part of the media process. Stan culture is a result of a culture that treated these artists like punching bags for cheap jokes. Like it was some mortal sin to be a pop star, especially a female pop star or one who catered to teenage girls, and that was deserving of ridicule and abuse. It was a defensive response from people who were tired of being unnecessarily derided for the audacity to love something so sincerely and proudly, to express joy without feeling like you need to look like you're not caring too much, like you're not too cool for it. And in particular, from girls and women who were tired of having to constantly prepare for battle every time they liked an artist. However, it's obviously gone far beyond the realm of just like defending Britney Spears from Perez Hilton and Jay Leno. Stan culture means it's not just isolated to specific fandoms or anything. It is the default mode of media interaction, of engagement, of fandom in a lot of ways, especially online. Pop music is still very much so a hotbed for it, and K-pop in particular has gotten a reputation for being some of the innovators of modern stan culture, but it extends to everything and dominates how we engage with culture in general. Politics is defined by stan culture now, particularly in terms of politicians like Donald Trump. It also isn't about just fighting to protect the existing fandom. It is evangelical in nature. You're looking for converts who will buy albums, stream songs, and cast votes for your fave. For our purposes, reality TV is another big avenue for stan behavior, particularly in competitive reality TV shows. After all, stan culture works best in an adversarial context where there's always material to work with and a legitimate structural incentive to engage with it, especially because of how reality TV is really responsive to fan behavior in a way that most media just isn't. When it comes to a reality competition show under stan culture, the fans are trying to influence outcomes on two fronts. The first is in terms of explicit shows of support for particular contestants, where the quantity of support will directly matter, will influence outcomes, such as campaigning for votes for your faves. And the second is in terms of trying to pressure production and participants to change a narrative or favor a contestant by making support for the contestant or program conditional on that contestant's outcomes. In theory, this doesn't have to be toxic. You can loudly and proudly advocate for your faves without having to drag others down. However, in practice, that doesn't really happen. When Valentina got eliminated on Drag Race Season 9, in an entirely justifiable elimination for the people who don't know about it because she straight up didn't know the words to the lip sync song, so of course she got sent home, her opponent received death threats, and other contestants received harassment from fans who said that they should have quit so that Valentina could take their spots, even though objectively she deserved to be eliminated there. Not every reality competition show is like this, to be clear. Survivor fans have their favorites and get upset when they get eliminated, but they understand more that it's part of the game. Drag Race fans, by contrast, do not understand that. And that's not entirely irrational of them, because unlike Survivor, Drag Race is a colossally important show for its industry, and a person's performance and presentation on it will often make or break their careers. For All-Star seasons, Drag Race typically changes the format to allow for the top contestants of the week to eliminate one of the bottoms, and this is a real problem for a show that's truly neck-deep in stan culture, because it puts contestants in a position of, do I want to win more than I want to not receive death threats for sending home someone's fave, where popular queens are often basically given immunity throughout the series because no one wants to risk the ire of their fan bases. And to be clear, production doesn't necessarily hate this idea. They actually kind of like it because it means that the blood's not on their hands as much and they aren't going to be accused of favoritism in protecting their planned winners, even though the structure does still protect them. That's why the one time that a queen actually did play competitively, Naomi Smalls in All Stars 4 eliminating frontrunner Manila Luzon, it led to them immediately changing the format to make it impossible for that to happen again. And nowadays, they basically never let the frontrunners touch the bottom 2 or bottom 3 to make sure nobody gets any ideas. Every time they start to get a little bit relaxed on that, they get hit with a Pangina Heels elimination and immediately reaffirm how important it is to not let that happen again. This is also a big part of why so many shows like to hand over the decision-making to fans after a certain point. Not only does it incentivize people to engage with stan culture, which itself makes the show more integral to people's personalities and help to boost its longevity, but it also removes their culpability in eliminating people. In a format where the producers have to eliminate people, it becomes much harder to rely on stan culture as a production tool because it can quickly spiral out of your control. When you leave the eliminations up to the fans or other contestants, especially with known contestants, then you have free reign to hype it up. And that's what Seung-yeon does in Buried Stars. See, I didn't forget what this video's about. It just took a while to get there. Seung-yeon relies on stan culture as a production tool to boost ratings and help her drive her narratives. After all, social media makes it feel real. It wouldn't do for her to reveal Haesung's criminal record on air. It's too forced. It's too inauthentic. But if the victim, in air quotes, is the one who posts it, or if some random auntie drags out the records, well, that is organic storytelling. That's thrilling. It gets people personally invested in the outcome. And that is something you can monetize. You can point to a hyper-invested audience to argue for a better time slot, for a bigger advertising budget, for more resources for production, for better salaries for executive producers, and for all this other stuff. The fans will watch the interview series, they'll watch the recap series, they'll follow the careers of the artists who are almost certainly signed to an affiliated talent agency, and they'll engage with the media themselves directly to spread it by word of mouth so that it reaches even more people who might just be willing to become a stan of someone. Reality TV also has stakes for failing to stan hard enough. But if you do a good job standing your fave, they might just win. So, how hard are you willing to work for your faves? And I think it's the authenticity of the context, of the conditions being manufactured to encourage and incite this behavior in universe, that allows Buried Stars to really look at how it affects the contestants and the narrative as a whole. Part 3. Inha stans and Gyu-Sung shippers DNI. Buried Stars as a game is just something I really love, which is that it drops us into a narrative that's already well established. The game opens with us being shown the broadcast of the episode that's being shot right before the stage collapses, with a brief rundown of how each contestant's run on the show has gone so far, but these aren't narratives that we can really do much about. Those are beyond our power. For our time with these characters, we're learning how they handle the narratives they found themselves in and try to steer them towards a better ending. But we can't change the fact that at their core, they are the silver spoon, the runaway, the snob, the betrayer, and the ex-con. When we open Vader, we see a long list of discussions about us, but rarely actually involving us. And right after the collapse, you'll run into a post from a user who's clearly one of your fans, raid with mask on. After all, they have your face as their profile picture, and they're tagging you, asking you to just leave any comment to let them know that you're okay. You have the option to just ignore them, or you can choose to communicate that you're fine by just reposting a post that Haesung had made a couple minutes earlier about how Do-yoon, Ju-young, Inha, Gi-hyuk, and Sale were all present. If you choose to repost it, 3 new Fader posts immediately pop up. One from Raid with Mask On, drawing attention to it. Another from another fan named Unlucky_Coffee, exclaiming that they thought it was a bot post. Each contestant's account automatically posts once an hour as just like a general promotion thing. And one from someone named Genius, who immediately begins analyzing what you're trying to say with that one action. He comes to the conclusion that it means that Haesung's list of survivors is correct. Do-yoon himself is well enough to dick around on Fader, internet calls are available, and that Do-yoon is actively trying to avoid getting himself in trouble by making his own posts, so he's just using Haesung as a proxy. Genius then immediately reshares a post from No License expressing relief that Haesung is safe, but confusion about why the betrayer would be helping him. Then another post, this time from an account named Wusuk_Hur, Do-yoon's former bandmate who he betrayed, complaining that Do-yoon's still acting foolishly after being rescued. Presumably just referring to him being rescued from elimination by a collapsing stage, given that he's still, under that stage. All of that just from resharing a post about who's stuck in the rubble. If you've been in reality TV fandoms before, you'll recognize this kind of behavior, especially if it's a pre-taped show, and especially if it's a show that invites back returning contestants. You can often tell who made it to the final 4 of a Drag Race season by just who's being careful with what they say online versus who's talking their shit. After all, their fate is still in the hands of production, and they don't like it when you're talking shit about them. Earlier this year, when Big Brother made the frankly fucking bizarre decision to sewer Rachel Riley, one of their all-time all-stars, you could see not just fan backlash, but alumni backlash, both from their explicit posts as well as sharing other complaints on their own timelines. Making a post is the nuclear option, though. For the most part, people try and communicate a little bit more subtly because they don't want to break any agreements. Reposts are endorsements. Follows are endorsements. Likes are endorsements. And the nature of each of those things means something a little bit different. Contestants are often bound by NDAs and other contractual obligations that don't allow them to just air out dirty laundry about production. and just as often are trying to be kind of petty and subtweet each other if they have beef instead of trying to blow it all up on main. And it's up to the fans trying to divine the truth from the tea leaves. So, again, that's how people might interpret what Do-yoon's doing. And it's a harsh reminder to him that just because a major accident just happened to him, people aren't going to magically drop their biases. Even in the midst of the crisis, Vader is full of people speculating about what it all might mean, and continuing the Stan Wars. Danny is using the fact that Gyu-Sung's posted to try and drag up the school violence stuff all over again, and shit-talking his fans for encouraging each other to still vote for him. And B-Star's salesman is reposting all of it onto Do-yoon's feed. Gyu-Sung's the only one of the 5 contestants to keep regularly posting on Vader throughout the story, much to the chagrin of the others, but he defends himself by saying that they all only feel that way because they're not the ones in the bottom. He has to make a case for himself or else he'll lose it all, and everything he worked for will disappear. And also, someone is threatening to kill him if he doesn't get more votes, so he has a bit of a fire under his ass. Another very real part of this that I think they get right is this classic Stan behavior, this tactic of finding the most obnoxious or annoying version of an opposing fandom's perspective, taking it in bad faith, and then acting as though that is the entire fandom's perspective. One of Ji-young's fans, Miserable Life, posts something about wanting them to rescue Ji-young first and get her out immediately because of her panic attacks, to which user Lie Detector goes on a rant about across a series of posts expressing disgust about the fans of Run Ji-young Run, saying that she ran away from her flop girl group, which never really debuted, so can't really flop, so of course she ran away from the accident site first, something which never happened, and then making a comment that she's probably a good match for Do-yoon, referencing his reputation as the betrayer because she also betrayed her group in his mind. He then mocks her for claiming she has panic attacks, derides her fans for supporting her, and calls her a loser. Again, to be clear, at this point in time, Ji-young has said and done literally nothing on Vader. They're all just hallucinating based on what one fan said about how they hope that the person with a pretty serious anxiety disorder might get rescued first. Is it a bit weird and parasocial? Sure, but it's a lot to read into that, is it not? Anyways, last thing I want to touch on in the early moments of the game, but another thing you'll notice throughout is the social media accounts trying to play detective about why the building collapsed and what's going on inside. To me, one of the defining aspects of Stan culture is the way that fandoms and just kind of people in general seem to feel obligated to take on some degree of management or oversight or investigation for their subjects. Trying to solve mysteries that involve them, trying to deduce what must be happening under the cover of night, trying to come up with the theory that answers the question of, who do we blame for the bad thing that happened to our fave? People will jump online to try and get an ounce of clout with a bit of insider knowledge that they have. Even if their insider knowledge is just, I was there and the building definitely collapsed, because that still puts them in the narrative. It gets them that little bit closer to not just being acknowledged by their fave, but being a part of their story. And crucially, you very rarely find support. As the game progresses, Raid with Mask On is basically your only ally on the outside, and they're not exactly a vicious stan of yours or anything. They're just one of the very few accounts who seems to see you as a human being. Once it's announced that voting will continue, the Stan Wars are back on in full force. Gyu-Sung stands trying to tear down Do-yoon because he's the closest one to take down, but everyone is just as vicious as before, each trying to twist the narrative to suit their needs. And once S. Sung-yeon shows up and starts stirring shit up, it becomes K-pop QAnon, the way that everyone's immediately trying to read between the lines to find the way that it proves that their ops are all evil, blowing things up out of proportion just to score a win regardless of the human beings involved. Part 4. Keep yourself safe, Do-yoon. One of the things that characterizes social media toxicity in the era of stan culture, which I don't really see reflected often in depictions of it, is this callous, almost lazy ruthlessness. A viciousness of convenience, like telling someone to kill themselves while on your lunch break eating a sandwich and then just putting your phone away to go do something else. This does not describe everyone, to be clear. There are plenty of vicious stans who are unemployed and proactive with their time as haters. But those people aren't really what defines stan culture, or social media toxicity within that broader stan culture context. Those kinds of insane people have always existed. When John Lennon was murdered, the stans of that era were mailing Yoko Ono bomb threats and bullet-riddled records. That shit isn't new. What is kind of new is that behavior is tacitly endorsed by the majority. The stans are the horses dragging a willing wagon from place to place with passengers who don't really care that much about the destination. They'll set up shop and do their business wherever they end up. When it comes to the toxicity in Buried Stars, to me, that's one of the things that gets the most right. There are a few proactive haters who get absolutely fucking feral, and they do drive a lot of the discussion, but there's rarely, if ever, anyone who expresses any desire to pump the brakes and chill out, and the ones who do exist are bowled right over. No one who's a voice of authority in the fandom is willing to push back against the insanity, and no one from the outside ever really seems to intervene and call it out either. Most of them follow the extreme fanatics around and participate on their terms with their framing. One of the most brutal moments in the entire narrative comes with the game's first ending, in which, spoilers ahead, Hae-sung is murdered in the bathroom, and Do-yoon's sanity meter falls through the fucking floor. You lose control of him, and the situation spirals out of control. Gyu-Sung has a panic attack and runs off, and Inha accidentally kills Sale after it's revealed that he's been stalking her and has a bunch of pictures of her in this notebook with all this information. And then when Inha runs off and slams the door to the dressing room behind her, when she understandably is a bit panicked by all of this, it causes a cave-in that crushes Gyu-Sung in her hiding spot. After finding Ji-young's body trapped in the rubble with Gyu-hyuk, Do-yoon stays with her while Gyu-hyuk walks off. Do-yoon then tries to talk to Inha but gets nowhere, so eventually returns to the stage, where he finds Gyu-hyuk hanging by his tie. Do-yoon, in that moment, realizes he's not actually alone. He still has Fader. And he posts a message stating simply, "All dead." This, unsurprisingly, does not go over well. Your one ally, Raid with mask on, is still trying to help you, asking what happened, clearly panicking a bit about your post. Your haters, on the flip side, smell blood in the water. Jungle Penguin accuses you of just being an attention whore. Mask on Repeat, a stan of your band Masquerade who became a Do-yoon anti after the betrayal, accuses you of just killing them all yourself. Do-yoon starts to hear the voices of the dead, and he feels responsible. He's the last survivor once again, just like he was the last survivor of Masquerade. If only he had kept it together, people might have survived. If only he weren't the betrayer. So he writes another message. "Sorry. So sorry. It's all my fault." Again, bad call, but his boyfriend did just kill himself, so we can cut him some slack. I mean, we might as well. The stans sure won't. Miserable Life, the Ji-young stan from before, demands to know what you did to her. Only Inha, meanwhile, will hold you personally responsible for whatever happened to Inha. Sung-yeon is in the replies of them all, taunting you, talking about how they should let you speak. After all, you want to confess your crimes, don't you? No Way just calls you a true betrayer, twisting a knife that he doesn't even know is there. He's just a hater, you can tell from his profile picture. Raid with mask on is trying to assure you that it's not your fault, that there must be something else happening, and tries to push back against the people taking glee in your suffering while there are real human beings dead in the rubble. It largely falls on deaf ears. The others have come to the conclusion that the betrayer must have killed them all. That's just in his character, and the lack of comments from the others proves it. Jungle Penguin posts, "The betrayer might have committed suicide, lol," and a Gyu-hyuk stan says, "If anything happens to Gyu-hyuk, I hope this asshole dies as well." Genius says you deserved it. After all, you betrayed your bandmates, who are definitely not complete assholes, in a singing competition show, so the logical response is that you should kill yourself. Jungle Penguin calls it justice served. Burnables, a relatively unactive user, points out that the people are being mean, that they did accuse Sale wrongfully already of something, and they're doing it again. Jungle Penguin retorts that Do-yoon said it was all his fault, and since the others are saying nothing, he must have killed everyone, or just hid alone away from them all. Lie Detector hopes you're dead. Only Inha says that if you ran away alone, stay and die there. A Hae-sung stan accuses you of leaving him for dead. A Gyu-hyuk supporter mockingly asks if you'll be happy that you'll become the winner this way. An anti-Do-yoon account tells him to kill himself if he's going to be the only survivor anyways. A Ji-young stan tells him to be responsible for what he's done. None of them know what happened inside, or the effect it's having on Do-yoon. Like, how could they? But they don't care either. The instigators, the people like Jungle Penguin, have rallied the audience against him. Do-yoon, in anguish after losing 4 friends in the span of about half an hour and feeling like he's responsible for them dying, tried to give the people an update, admittedly phrased pretty poorly, and they immediately jumped on him. Like, he's the villain of the season now for real. More than anyone could ever be, really. He never once indicated to anyone that he wanted to kill them. He never wanted to kill anyone. He never said anything like that. Or that he did kill them. He just said that they're dead. If anyone's a killer here, it's Inha. She got Sale and then Ji-young as well by accident. Plus, who knows who killed Hae-sung and Sung-yeon. He just posted saying he was sorry and that it was all his fault. Not because he killed them, but because he felt like at every step in the process, he could have done something to save everyone. He could have forced Hae-sung to come back with the group so that he wasn't being murdered in the bathroom. He could have de-escalated the situation between Inha and Sale before she pushed him and killed him. And he could have stopped Ji-young from running away and getting crushed. That's what he's apologizing for. And the worst one is Gyu-hyuk, because that was the simplest one. He just needed to not let his friend walk away alone. But he was in shock and didn't even consider it in the moment. That's what he was saying he was sorry for. That he hadn't saved them. That they were, in his mind, dead because of him. Not because he killed them, though. But Stan Twitter doesn't really care, does it? The Sands are going to take the betrayer at his word, are they? They're not going to act in good faith, are they? Do-yoon, understandably, is at a low point. Should he have posted? No, obviously. But literally, what else could he do? What could he do at all? Somehow everyone around him died in the span of like a single episode's runtime of this fucking show, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. Or at least what he could have done, he failed to do. The least he felt like he could do was just let people know what had happened. And that's the worst thing you can do to an angry stan. Reveal your weaknesses. And then they jumped him, no longer just musing about how he's the bad guy or talking about how he should lose, but actively telling him to kill himself. There's no coded language, there's no hedging their bets, just straightforwardly telling him to do it from accounts with the faces of his dead friends. And so, he does. He gets Gi-Hyuk's body down from where it hangs, borrows his tie, and throws his watch on the ground. The first ending of the game is soundtracked by the clicks of dozens of posts coming through the watch and the roaring of an imagined crowd as the screen goes white, getting louder and louder until the final line of text displays. He was finally ready to make everyone happy. And then it's over. The screen goes black, and the audio cuts out as Do-yoon hangs, literally snapping out his light. A short epilogue plays, revealing that Inha seems to have survived, but that's all you get before you're sent back to the main menu and another run begins. It is fucking vicious. Like, I am certain that I'm failing to communicate just how brutal this feels. In future runs, the big divergent point in the narrative is when you find Hyaesung in the bathroom. Sometimes he lives, sometimes he dies, but in either case, it doesn't automatically tank your sanity and you get to keep playing. However, the memory of that first run haunts everything you do, both in terms of the character design constantly reminding you of it, as I talked about in my other Buried Stars video, but also in terms of those same accounts popping up and talking their shit. Those names aren't randomly generated or something like that. When the story restarts, they come back with you, and they continue following, mocking, teasing, harassing, and lying about you just like before. In universe, this is brutal for the characters, especially because everyone surviving longer means there's more time for shit to come out. Sung continues to drip feed drama to the hungry vultures circling overhead, and even though you avoided the worst possible outcome this time because you kept it together when Hyaesung got his head bashed in, that doesn't mean that those people aren't still just eagerly waiting to get to send that 4 a.m. tweet telling you that you should kill yourself. And that's the thing. The human response to what happened is to be sad, to be worried, to be scared about these people you care about, even if it is a bit parasocial. And some of them are. Raid with mask on seems genuinely concerned about what happened. Burnables is clearly aware that the mob is getting out of hand, but there's nothing they can do about it anymore. However, the others you see clearly don't give a shit. They're not only brave from behind a keyboard, but they're callous. These aren't real people to them. Do-yoon's not a person, he's the betrayer. They're lazy, too. They just follow the motion of the ocean, believing the first thing immediately in front of their faces and just going along with it. If one person says Do-yoon must have killed everyone, the stands don't jump to, like, oh my god, what the fuck is happening in there? But instead to, if my fave is dead, you better kill yourself before I kill you myself. Gyu-Sung died scared and panicking and alone, sitting in a hallway desperately trying to get her wits about her when the ceiling collapsed on her. She didn't die instantly. She clearly had enough time to try and scrabble around and escape, but all that got out was her hand before she died. Do her stands care? Of course not. She's not a fucking person to them. Does anyone actually seem to want to find out who killed Hyaesung, or even the others in their mind? Of course not. He's not a person to them either. Someone smashed him in the side of the head with a mop so hard it cracked his skull against a pillar and broke the mop clean in half, and then they dragged his body into a bathroom stall. There was blood everywhere. The sight of it horrified all 5 remaining survivors who were mourning the loss of a friend, even if he was sometimes a bit abrasive to them. And Fader didn't care. These aren't people, they're buried stars. They are objects on a screen, devoid of humanity. Even their own stands just want to see the most dramatic outcome. And of course they do, that's what Sung-in primed them to. The show focuses on them as entertainment objects first, and humans a distant second. Ji-young's suffering with her panic attacks is just played for narrative drama. I mean, who cares that she actually has PTSD from being sexually assaulted by a producer when she was with Beloved? Not Fader, that's for fucking sure. Haesung was attacked by a wealthy classmate with powerful parents and defended himself, and that's where he caught a charge from. He was a victim, both then and now in the competition, when Sung-yeon was grooming him, abusing her power over him for a romantic and sexual relationship that she immediately dropped once the charges came to light. He was about 19 or 20 at the time. Sung-yeon was about 34. He wanted to win the competition, do anything it took, because those charges fucked up his and his family's lives, and he wanted to be able to make something of himself, to make it worth it for them to have stuck by him. He lashed out because he was understandably angry at the world and was focused on getting ahead to pay back that debt, not because he was some violent hoodlum. Gi-hook's father's name is constantly dragged up to try and drag him down, even though he was a neglectful, shitty father who abandoned Gi-hook with his mentally ill mother in poverty, and she eventually killed herself too. Fader doesn't care about any of that. They care far more about trashing him for being a nepo baby, accusing him of lying to get a scholarship for poor students when he clearly didn't need it. After all, he's the silver spoon. Sung-yeon also tried to seduce him into a relationship and abuse him too, by the way. He turned her down, for complicated story reasons. She was the one who pushed Do-yoon to betray his bandmates. She was the one who kept trying to get Ji-young to crack for the cameras to create a more and more stressful situation to try and get that moment of drama. She was the one who pushed Inha to erase her old self and become a useful doll for the producers to play dress up with. She was the one who tormented Sale, forcing him into more and more illegal activity with the threat of her dissatisfaction looming over him if he ever strayed. Every one of those people was suffering at the hands of Sung-yeon. She drove them to the brink of insanity in their own ways, playing with their insecurities and using them to storyboard the narrative that she'd guide the fandom into following along with. And the thing is, she didn't really do much of it directly. She didn't do that cruelty herself. She didn't need to. She knew that she could rely on Fader to spin her narratives for her, for the stands to be able to put 2 and 2 together and get 4 without her telling them the answer to the questions she was presenting to them. And the stands knew she was a master manipulator. Like, that's what she was known for. That was her big claim to fame as a producer, that she was excellent at exploiting and exposing the backgrounds of her subjects no matter the consequences to them if it meant entertainment. And yet they chose to believe the narratives that spun out from the show. They knew it was probably manipulated in their hearts, but they didn't care. They accepted the framing that she had built, and they operated accordingly. The show didn't treat them like people because Sung-yeon didn't treat them like people. And so of course the audience was primed not to see them as people either. Part 5. Constructing a Toxic Public. The thing that Buried Stars arguably gets most correct about social media toxicity is the malleability of the masses. The willful negligence in their actions, the callousness that comes with a screen, and the ease with which they can be whipped into a mob. Stan culture treats the mob leaders as valid parts of a fandom community rather than as insane fanatics who need to be cordoned off from polite society, and treats those people's targets as valid ones. Maybe most of all, it gets the inhumanity that is perceived in those who are famous, both in terms of being actually famous or just like a Twitter or reality TV personality from those masses. A RuPaul's Drag Race contestant getting death threats for years over eliminating someone's fave. A music reviewer being public enemy #1 for giving your bias's dogshit album a bad score. A game developer getting their games review bombed because some random person on the team said fuck Nazis at some point and Trump stans took that personally, I guess. It also gets how, while the people participating in the toxicity treat it casually, the people on the receiving end don't. It is overwhelming for them. Ji-young can't engage with social media basically at all out of fear of the hate campaign that's been astroturfed against her by her former label after she refused to put up with being sexually abused by one of their people. Sale can only engage anonymously, lest someone make the connection that he's the guy who crashed out during auditions 2 seasons ago. Gyu-hyuk goes on Fader only to see endless posts about how he's a nepo baby because of a famous father who abandoned him, and his mother, in hopeless poverty that ended up making her kill herself. Inha's entire character on the show is manufactured by Sung-yeon, and yet Fader is full of people who treat her like that is who she truly is in her heart and hate her for it. Haesung was a victim of a rich, powerful bully who twisted the system to screw him over and is now on social media posting about it like he's still the victim. And now he uses Fader to desperately try and convince people that he wasn't the bad guy, to no avail because he's not from a rich, powerful family. Whenever Do-yoon uses the app, he is mobbed by a horde of people eagerly looking to get a pound of flesh out of him, ripping him apart for betraying his band by continuing on after their elimination, and trying to twist every event into this narrative that fits that storyline. But in spite of all that, I don't think that Buried Stars really wants to be cynical about social media. There's a reason why it puts you in the shoes of Do-yoon, the only character left in the competition who doesn't really have any stans. He has supporters, but You get the vibe that if the roles were reversed and any of the other 5 were the last man standing at any point, they would not be telling them to kill themselves. Do-yoon maintains a low profile, keeping his eye on the prize and trying to shut out the noise, and that makes him a pretty unique perspective in all of this. Ji-young and Gi-hyuk are already kind of de facto celebrities from before the show even started thanks to their old girl group and their famous father, respectively, and Gyu-Sung and Inha are both just far more built for reality TV in terms of being dramatic and willing to fight just about anybody who comes in front of them. It makes sense for all 4 of them to have these stan communities around them and to feel so strongly about them. Do-yoon isn't really the typical participant, and that's important too. Social media toxicity negatively impacts all 6 of the characters, but Do-yoon really feels it more than anyone else because he is isolated and alone in it because he has internalized that he is the betrayer. At the very beginning of the game, Do-yoon sees a piece of rubble hurtling towards Gi-hyuk and tackles him out of the way, getting hit by it instead. It doesn't kill him, obviously, and they're able to quickly dig him out, but by all accounts, Do-yoon was prepared to die to save his friend. A running theme throughout the narrative is that Do-yoon does not only want Gi-hyuk to survive because they're friends, and arguably more, but we've been over that before as well, but because Gi-hyuk is the only living witness to the fact that he isn't a betrayer, that he is loyal to his friends, that he is willing to die for them. That's part of why it gets to him so hard when Fader starts ripping into him in the first ending. Up until the point of Gi-hyuk's suicide, he still had living proof that he wasn't what those people thought he was. If they survived, just the 2 of them, he'd have someone who would testify to his character. But without him, there's nobody left who could testify to it. He would be the betrayer forever without Gi-hyuk. And that's also a running theme of the social media toxicity. The toxic stans know they're being toxic, and the bandwagoners know they're not exactly being kind, but none of them know what's really going on with any of these characters. They don't really grasp the weight of the words they're saying because they don't really know the targets well enough to know how it'll be received. They think they're mocking Ji-young for just being a bit of a flighty coward who makes excuses for her irresponsibility, but they're striking a real nerve with her over her PTSD from being sexually abused. They think they're mocking Gi-hyuk for just being a nepo baby who had everything handed to him because of his father, but they're striking a nerve with him over being abandoned by his father and losing his mother to suicide. They think they're mocking Inha for being antagonistic and snobbish, but they're striking a nerve with her over the fact that none of this is really her. She's effectively being harassed and stalked and threatened over the fictional character she's playing that Sung-yeon created for her. They think they're mocking Do-yoon for being selfish and betraying his band to get ahead, but they're striking a nerve with him over the fact that he feels like he is failing everyone around him. That his presence leads to worse outcomes and the immense guilt he feels over the one time he tried to strike out on his own. They think they're mocking Gyu-Sung for being a bully and a production favorite, but they're striking a nerve with him over not just the fact that he was the one being bullied by someone with enough power to cover it up, but the fact that he was being actively abused by a producer nearly twice his age who held his fate in her hands and then threw him to the wolves when she was done with him. Social media toxicity is almost universally the source of all conflict in Buried Stars. If the survivors hadn't had access to Fader, they probably would have just hung out there for a few hours and then been rescued. But Fader invites doom scrolling, even when it actively hurts the sanity of the characters. Even though they know it's going to hurt their feelings, most of them can't help but scroll at least a little bit to see what people are saying. Buried Stars isn't a game where you're supposed to try every single dialogue option or interaction. Sometimes reading a post or bringing up a subject with a certain character at a certain point will just make them upset and hurt Do-yoon's sanity. Fader is full of those moments. It almost never boosts your sanity, and the topics you get from Fader, especially from Sung-yeon, almost always just make people unhappy. The most real part of it all is that they just can't help themselves. They feel this urge to know what's being said about themselves, even though they know it's nothing useful. Once Sung-yeon starts threatening to reveal their secrets, even the ones who don't want to scroll for themselves will get the others to inform them about what was being exposed, because they feel like they have to know. And at the end of the day, they're just a fucking troll. They picked up this gossip from God knows where, maybe they were even being fed it by Sung-yeon before she died or something, but they've been using it to just cause chaos because they find it fun. And the stans know that their subjects can't help but want to know what's being said. The worst conditions for toxic stan culture to arise in are exactly something like Buried Stars and reality competition shows like it. Contexts in which the subjects are accessible, where the stans can confidently assume that the toxicity will end up on their timelines and can influence things, and where the subjects can't afford to not engage with the public, even though the audience isn't necessarily getting the full story. Production fucks with reality via editing all the time, and the participants don't know how it'll be edited until it airs. And again, this is a real world thing too. Drag Race is infamous for this fight between contestants and production, to the extent that RuPaul herself has literally released a whole song bitching about contestants who blame it on the edit. After all, you're the one who said it. Correcting a misleading edit or trying to correct a fandom in this era of toxic stan culture is an impossible task. You're damned if you do, like Gyu-Sung and Do-yoon, and you're damned if you don't, like Gi-hyuk, Ji-young, and Inha. For Hae-sung, it only causes him to get more defensive, which the stands interpret as proof that he is aggressive and violent, which in turn only causes him to lash out and drive people away more. For Do-yoon, it causes him to internalize this concept of himself as the betrayer, someone who is inherently disloyal, selfish, callous, evil, and it tears him apart to the point of actively stopping him from being able to help people when they most need it. For Inha, it causes her to feel like she has to lean into this fake persona even more. After all, what happens if people figure out who she really is and they start going after her friends or family over the character she's been portrayed as? Like, everything about her is different. Her hair, her eyes, all of it has been remade for the purposes of this show. What if this is all she's got? What if the real her is just not interesting enough to the fans? For Ji-young, it causes her to constantly be afraid of losing it all once again to an abusive person that she doesn't have the power to fight back against, of being branded a coward because she tried to protect herself, and feeling like she can't ever really explain why she left beloved, so she just has to take it all on the chin. For Gyu-hyuk, it just drags him further and further into his own mental illness related to his parents, and that's all I'm going to say about him for story reasons, because I still want you to play this game. If you have played it, you know what I mean though. For Sale, it turns a complete nobody, just a production assistant, into a convenient scapegoat when all these rabid fan bases are looking for a villain to blame it on. And their jumping to conclusions directly leads to his death if Do-yoon isn't able to stop it. I could go on and on about this game forever, but I think the point I'll end on is that the point of this video is to examine how buried stars get social media toxicity right. I've tried my best to explain that in the abstract, but I think you genuinely can't fully understand how it feels until you've actually played it yourself. Until you've sat in Do-yoon's shoes and scrolled through post after post after post, becoming familiar with the names of your haters and your supporters, and slowly starting to lose sight of how much of what they're saying is completely baseless bullshit. You see the stands slowly getting more and more riled up, getting more and more extreme in their language, and pulling their punches less and less as agitators like S. Seung-yeon and Do-yoon's former bandmates and Hae-sung's former classmates just try and stir shit up, sometimes for fun, but sometimes for an ulterior motive. It's an aspect of this that can't really be communicated by just being told that it does it right, because there is no substitute for that feeling that the game induces of having you sit there, doom scrolling through the feed because you don't have much else to do, and watching it make your life worse while being powerless to stop yourself. There is no substitute for that feeling of watching the audience at large turn on Do-yoon more and more, and eventually get to the point where they are actively, gleefully encouraging his suicide. There's no substitute for knowing how he deteriorated to the point that he accepts their premise, that he accepts that they're right, he should. And in the end, all of those people just go to bed at night and move on with their lives. Depending on the ending, some of the survivors end up returning for season 5 of Buried Stars, and who knows, maybe some of those stans and antis just go back to their old ways when they come back. Or maybe they stop caring anymore. Maybe they find something else to be toxic about. None of this is permanent for them. The same can't be said for the contestants. There is no way to make sure all 6 survivors make it out alive, and it is directly a consequence of those same stans who doubtlessly feel no responsibility for any of it. After all, why would they? The snowflake isn't responsible for the avalanche, is it? Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. If you didn't like it, also feel free to do all of that. Engagement is engagement at the end of the day, and I cannot afford to be picky right now. If you really liked it though, you should consider becoming a channel member. Members give $5 or more a month to support the channel, and in return get to vote for one video topic per month, such as the one you just watched that they picked last month. As well, today is the last day to vote in the current community choice poll, open to anyone regardless of whether or not they're a member. You guys get to pick one of the upcoming video topics, plus vote for an old member's choice topic to get a second chance and a handful of new emotes for the channel. And what's more, each vote you cast will earn you an entry into a giveaway for one of these Wiggler pin and sticker bundles. There's 4 bundles up for grabs, and if you'd like one of them to be yours, you can find the link in the description to vote. Lastly, thank you very much to all my channel members, both now and from when this topic was selected. At the $25 Elite membership tier, thank you to Adele, Robot Juice, and Bingo Banga. At the $10 Premium membership tier, thank you to Tortoise, Anja Tenar, Bailey Nichols, Cavi Corbin, Corey Anders, NJD, and Theo. At the $5 channel membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Destiny, Nemo the Survivor, Cadence, Gavost, Marsh Alice, Crimson Cyclo, CatLover192, Corey, Aman Dodley, MV, The Only Enigma, Mariah, Meep Cubed, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Marcy Gaskill, Deku _ Safan, Lala the Bambi, JMD Toaster, Ginkgo, Teo Tamara, Please Like Me, Puddinsus, Alinea, Caffeine Jelly, Ismi, Aiden S, 1000 Dumplings, and Knee Lost. Plus, a special shout out to Curie, Astion Highglypher, Bingo Banga, Gasai, Stitch 6261106, NJD, Robot Juice, and Adele for your contributions to the 2.0 Donathon. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or you just clicked on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.